Arkos is a retro-inspired first-person shooter, created in the Unity engine and developed by RetroSouls. It harks back to the shooters of the late 80s and 90s, such as Wolfenstein 3D, Heretic and Hexen. I hope you like right-angled walls because that's all you're going to see here. Unlike those games though, there's no visual trickery here. It's rendered in a full 3D world. It feels like a modern game wearing the skin of an old game, rather than the opposite. And that's a good thing. As great and influential as Wolfenstein 3D was, it hasn't necessarily aged the best out of the original few boomer shooters. It's presented in a voxel style, reminding me most of something like Trove or more recently The Tourist, using simple and bright colours to show off the game's world. Honestly, I really like it. I've always had a soft spot for voxel games, and it's always refreshing to play a first-person shooter that doesn't look like somebody spilt coffee all over your monitor. It's executed in a manner similar to the original Quake, with a hub world where difficulty is selected and teleports to each of the game's 5 episodes. Each episode has 4 or 5 levels, culminating with a boss fight at the end. Levels see the player tasked with killing enemies scattered throughout, finding up to 4 coloured keys and progressing to the exit teleporter. Each level tends to be fairly short, with most being completable in 3 to 5 minutes, on normal difficulty at least anyway. The level design is generally fine, but occasionally a little obtuse. There are several points where progression is gated behind finding a secret in the level in order to continue. While it didn't take me long to find the secrets, it kind of halted any flow in its tracks, due to the walls that open to secrets being generally identical to those around them, meaning a period of wall humping was required to try and find some kind of way forward. It only happened a couple of times in the late game, but I felt it was worth mentioning. There's no map either, which isn't a massive issue due to the generally small size of the levels, but I wouldn't have complained if it was there either. The environments are somewhat sparse. There's not much other than pillars and torches filling up the space, but due to the small size of the maps and the rooms, it works. There's a simple destruction system for all these objects too, with most of them being destroyable, occasionally revealing secrets. There isn't much of a story here, but there doesn't really need to be. The player controls Arkos, the White Wizard, and is searching the dungeons of an ancient castle, looking for a powerful weapon owned by his teacher, who disappeared a long time ago. There's about as much context as you'd get playing something like Doom, and that's fine. We're not really here for the story anyway. The medieval fantasy setting naturally influences the weapons and enemies found in Arkos. 6 weapons in total can be found over the 5 episodes, with most lining up with the traditional weapon found in most first-person shooters. Each of these is a different staff, helpfully colour-coded to make identifying them easier. Starting off with a red staff, which is the game's pistol and has unlimited ammo. It isn't very effective against anything, but it not using any ammo still makes it occasionally useful if you're running low. Next up is the blue staff, the Sceptre of Twilight. This serves as the game's SMG. It's great in the first couple of episodes for dealing with low-level enemies you encounter. The yellow staff, Rising Phoenix, is the game's shotgun, firing a star-shaped spread of 5 projectiles over a short range, dealing fairly massive damage early on. It stays pretty relevant throughout the entire game. Fourth on the list is the Ethereal Sonata, the green staff. This is the one I probably use the least in the campaign. Its primary fire acts in a similar way to the pistol, only slower firing and slightly more damaging. However, while the projectile is in the air, hitting the right mouse button will teleport the player to the location of the shot at that moment. It isn't particularly useful in combat, but there's some sections later on in the game that rely on how it works. Stormbringer is the penultimate weapon in the game, and functions as the game's minigun or heavy machine gun. This is going to be your workhorse weapon throughout once you get your hands on it. It eats up ammo pretty quickly, but most things go down to it pretty quickly too. The final weapon, Soul Eater, allows the player to not only walk on lava when it's equipped, which is pretty essential in a few levels, but it also refills ammo while standing on lava, which is good, because it eats ammo like nothing else in the game, but decimating whatever gets close. Ammo is a shared pool for all weapons, except the starting staff, so switching to the correct staff as the situation requires is pretty important, so as to make good use of the limited supply. There's a decent variety to the enemies, ranging from wizards to knights to giant spiders and trees. Most of these come in a few different flavours, melee focused, projectile focused, etc. The knight has a variant with a shield that renders it invulnerable for a few seconds while it advances, and the trees serve as immobile turrets to block your path. None of these are hit scanners either as far as I can tell, which is always welcome. Arkos runs very well, being virtually flawless and locked at 60 frames per second during my entire time with it. I can only recall one moment when that wasn't the case, which was during the episode 2 boss fight, and that was only for a couple of seconds. I did have to run the game with VSync enabled though due to getting a lot of screen tearing otherwise. I don't have a huge number of criticisms for Arkos. I will say it's very short though. Beating all 5 episodes only took about 2.5 to 3 hours on normal difficulty, and while there's a few higher settings than that, I don't have a huge urge to replay it at the moment. The game has a great MIDI soundtrack by Kubikami, and while it's not quite Rise of the Triad soundtrack, it's up there. If you like this type of old school shooter and don't mind its brevity, I can easily recommend Arkos. It's less than a tenner and even has a demo available so you can check it out before you buy.